can really scale any technique. So the three pieces of today's agenda is going to be, how do you scale any kind of sales technique, regardless of who it's coming from or the source? I know there's a lot of people on LinkedIn who are giving some advice, on how to write messages or how to, cold call people. So we're going to start off with how to scale any sales technique. We're going to follow up with how can you structure a playbook to make sure that you get, the maximum amount of benefit from all the leads that are coming through to you, regardless of whether that's from marketing or people that are self-sourced. And then we're going to dive in. The main part of today's presentation is going to be on follow-up emails. So if you take a look at the session on how to personalize at scale, that talks a lot about how to gear your first message, but we're going to go into pretty deeply today messages 2 through 5 and how you can have an overarching strategy for those. So without further ado, let's go into how to scale any sales technique. So when you are looking online or you go to any kind of training, I remember, I've been very deeply Sandler trained, Challenger trained, spin selling training. I've listened to, sat in on sessions with John Barrows and MJ Hoffman and a lot of different, Josh Braun, of course, I've heard a lot of his stuff. And whenever I'm thinking about someone who's training me on an ad hoc piece of technique, I was always very interested on how do I get this into sales engagement? How do I get this into an overarching strategy? So A, I can make sure that it works. B, I can make sure that it works for me, regardless of what company that I'm working for. And then C, how do I repeat that into a more comprehensive strategy? So here's a quick 9-step guide. Anyone who's out there watching, if you want to just take like a screenshot of this and kind of take it home, we're not going to spend too much time here. But basically, when I'm listening to anyone who says like, here's a template that you should write someone, keep in mind that every time that someone's giving you any kind of piece of advice, it's not going to be specific to your business. So I typically start with breaking down the number of sentences for the email that they're pitching. Number 2, break down what's being accomplished overall. Like, what is the point of the email? Am I going for a meeting? Am I going for negotiation, etc.? Number 3, I break down what is being accomplished in each sentence. And a great example is, a lot of times in the first sentence for people, it'll be the reason for my outreach. It'll be basically the premise of why you're reaching out. So you want to look at each sentence and see what's being accomplished. A lot of trainers train on pattern interrupts in the beginning, something to break the ice or an icebreaker. So you just want to diagnose like what is happening in that sentence. Number 4, you want to break down and label the technique that is being deployed there. So, like I just mentioned, a lot of trainers will say like right off the bat, like the rule of 3, you should say, hey, David, did you come to the conference today because you wanted more on sales technique, you wanted more on sales best in practice, or did you just want the really sweet swag from visiting our booth? So it's serious reason, and then a funny hook on the end. And so you want to take that technique of whatever the trainer is training you on, self-label the technique if they haven't already for you, and just understand from a high level, what are they doing within that piece of technique. Once I have the technique for each part of the email that is being sent, I write in an example for reference within the sequence that I've built. So for all of you who out there who have a sales engagement tool, Outreach, it's going to be sequences, SalesLoft, it's cadences, and I think it's called plays. But you basically want to write in an example reference of that piece of technique within the sequence that you have deployed. So a lot of people have cold outbound sequences. So if you wanted to say pattern interrupt, right off in the first email, in the first sentence, you could say you need to do some kind of pattern interrupt here in parentheses, and then give an example of like, did I catch you at the worst possible time, or et cetera. But you basically want to write in there a reminder of the type of thing that you're supposed to do in that moment. You want to train on multiple examples for all the SDR leaders out there, or sales leaders. You want to train on multiple examples, of the type of technique. So, great example is, I say to stay away from a lot of times wasted text. There's several different examples of wasted text. There's, I just want to bubble this to the top of your inbox. There's, I want to circle back here. I want to check in here, just following up here. But they're all, in essence, the same technique. They're wasted text to kind of soften the blow. So you want to train on multiple examples of whatever technique the trainer was talking about, several different examples so that your reps know it for reference. You want to beta test out the responses and types of responses that you get back. So, I always take whatever advice I'm being given, I try and adapt it to my business model. I try to see if it works, and if it does work, how well does it work? And then I trim accordingly. And then the last and most important piece of scaling any kind of technique is you want to leverage your team to find other examples. So, great example over here at Chorus. I will say like, hey, 3 parts of a hook statement are going to be X, Y, and Z. I want another example of how I can pattern interrupt on the beginning, and I will pool my team and say like, hey, what's a new pattern interrupt that we haven't done before? So I think the saying goes that the minute that it's a thing, it's not a thing anymore. So you'll see a lot of times someone has a really good hook or technique, et cetera. A lot of people start doing it and then it's ineffective. So I think there needs to be a constant need or a constant push for any kind of sales leader or any kind of rep to be effective, that you need to innovate. You need to come up with new ways to intro. So now that we've gone into scaling any sales technique, I want to take a brief look into playbook. Again, most of this is going to be in the session that I suggest everyone watch on personalization at scale. But basically, the playbook that I have over here at Chorus is going to be the same shell structure for any kind of company that I work with, that I suggest. You're going to have 2 types of scenarios that you can build. Scenarios where you should mention the premise and scenarios where you shouldn't mention the premise. So if you look into all these different sequence suggestions that I labeled here, let's just dive into a couple of them. You've got content downloads, event attendees, webinar registrants, executive churn, firmographic triggers, common VCs, demoed in the past, dark funnel, company funding, IPO, email opens, or website views. So this is a comprehensive look of all of the different sequences that I have built for my reps, and they are shell sequences. On the left-hand side for column 1 here, we actually do mention the premise. We say like, hi, notice that you went to sales development conference. And then we transition and make it about them. In this second portion, we actually don't mention what the trigger is. A couple examples here are company funding or website view. So a lot of people could get creeped out with if you know that they've been looking at your website. So we go ahead and we take it as a trigger that this person is probably more likely to buy, but we don't actually mention it for context. We talk all about the buyer themselves. And again, this is a high-level crash course, so I'm just going to go very quickly here, but you can look at more into that session, personalization at scale. But every single sequence, regardless of which one of these sequences it is, every one of these sequences is structured the same. It's over 21 business days. We have 16 steps. We have 5 cold emails, 10 cold calls, and a LinkedIn research step at the beginning. So, this LinkedIn research step, we are hunting 3 personalized premises at this point, and we are storing them within Outreach so we can use them to fuel the rest of the sequence. But we have 5 different cold emails, 5 different pods of outreach, if you will, getting more aggressive in terms of time at the end of the sequence. So, great example is pod 1. So basically, after we look up the person on LinkedIn to see if they're still at the company, what kind of premises could we use to hook back into our product, we'll do a cold email, cold call for day 112. Day 889 is going to be the second pod, cold email, cold call. Day 13, 13, 14, cold email, cold call. 18, 18, 19, cold email, cold call. You're getting the structure here, but basically we do 2 cold calls and an email for every single pod, and we do 5 separate pods, more aggressive on the back end. So you basically You want to teach your buyer. A lot of reps, they are really aggressive in the beginning of their sequence and then they peter off. But in my experience and based off the great research from MJ Hoffman, the author of Why You Now, he basically found whenever he was looking at sequencing different actions, that if he did that, he was teaching his prospect, if he petered out here near the end, that if they just waited long enough, he would go away. So he flipped it in terms of structure and is lighter on the beginning and more aggressive in the end. And that actually has worked out with me for 3 teams that I've built, that you want to get to know your buyer on the very front end, be very, very light in your amount of touches, but very, very personalized in the emails that you're sending over and cold calls that you're making. And then you want to speed up near the end so that they, A, know you at that point, and B, they get the feeling that if they don't respond to you, then you're not going to go away. So you want to speed up here in the end until your breakup email. As far as the premises to pick, again, in this session, Personalization at Scale, I go much deeper, but there's 5 different buckets of personalized premises that you can tease out. You can see them here: self-authored content, engaged content, self-authored being something that they've written and actually been a part of. Bucket 2 is engaged content, basically content that they didn't author themselves, but that they liked, shared, or commented on LinkedIn. Third bucket is self-attributed traits, their profile line, headline, company line. Bucket 4 is junk drawer, schools attended, personal interests, and hobbies. And then the last one is bucket 5, company level data, M&A, posts, blogs, hiring, and website language. The higher trigger rates are going to be for buckets. Bucket 1 is the highest trigger rate, and then down to bucket 5 is the least amount of responses you're going to get. So I would suggest trying to find a premise in one of these top 3 buckets. And general rule of thumb here, as an asterisk mark, whatever premise you pick, I would be ready to relate back to your product. So I wouldn't pick, do what's called the 10-80-10 rule, where you pick out a personalized premise like, hey, Becc, I noticed you went to Texas A&M, and then talk all about how Drift helps convert more website views. So you want to make sure that you're genuine to your prospect and that you relate to them, that you picked out this personalized premise for a reason. In terms of how to scale that, you can create very, very quickly with an outreach. You can create all of these custom tags. And basically at the beginning, remember whenever we were researching on LinkedIn, our buyer at the very beginning, we're going to take those premises and we're going to store them within Outreach or whatever sales engagement provider you're using and hit save, so that every single time you call that person, this window should pop up and you'll have your personalized premise that's ready. In terms of how you pair those, and then I want to get into follow-up emails. Sorry, this is really quick, kind of crash course. But how you pair those together is, again, if you have what's called a postbound premise, meaning, back up in this list, you'll see content download, event attendee, webinar registrant. I would mention it for context, transition with, but more importantly, and then talk all about them. So with a summary. So it looked like this. Hi, David, noticed that you attended the 10-Bound Sales Development Conference today. But more importantly, I saw that you wrote this article on LinkedIn about scaling effective teams. If you don't have a postbound premise, meaning this is just cold outbound, there's nothing that this person has done in terms of trigger to be warmer to you, and you just want to hunt this person, they're very, very high value, then I would say, hi, David, reason for my outreach is I noticed that you wrote this article on LinkedIn about scaling teams effectively. One line that stood out to me, and I would give them an excerpt. So you basically want to prove to your prospects that you know them and that you're very well researched and that you are different than 99.9% of reps because you did your homework and you know who they are and you're excited to talk to them. So my experience within my teams, I've seen anywhere from 4x to 6x results whenever that we're going from relevant, buyer persona sequences to let's talk about David in specific. So instead of talking about David in terms of his buyer persona as a CEO, and I can sequence 300 people in that, we would say like, hey, I want to talk about something David did in specific so that he knows I know who he is. So again, for more on that session and more on the first email and what it looks like, I would challenge you guys to, all go take a look at the Personalization at Scale session that was sent out by Tenbound. But let's talk about the follow-up emails. So now we know what the first email looks like. Let's go into what the first email looks like, and then we'll go into sending. So there's 5 emails in total in the sequence. The first email has 4 pieces. So you want to, number 1, in your first line, you want to, which is your longest line, you want to give the reason for your outreach. And again, make sure that it's a personalized premise. So Google did a search on how you read emails and how prospects read emails in general. And they start at 2 o'clock on the email and they go clockwise. So what that communicates to you about how people are going to read your emails is they're going to read the end of the first line first, the end of the last line second. They're then going to read the beginning of the last line and then land on in the middle. So the first thing that they're going to see, they want to know who you are and what you want before they want to know about your value prop. So in the first line, you want to give your personalized reason for outreach. Hi, David, I noticed that you wrote this article on scaling effective teams. One line that stood out to me is it all comes down to cold calls. The second line, which should be the medium length line, you want to deliver your value prop in a way that is hooked to personalization. So a quick tip here, I typically do 3 types of, or value prop statements that start with 3 types of sentences. What if, imagine if, and I have an idea on how you could. And there are 3 different pieces to a value prop. The first piece in the beginning, you're trying to loop in 2 to 3 words at the beginning of this sentence that were used in the end of the first sentence or their excerpt of what they wrote about. The second piece of the value prop, we're trying to navigate our way back to buyer persona. And then the last piece of the value prop, we say and blank as a result, and we list the one thing that that buyer cares about. So a great example is, hi, David. I noticed reason for my outreach is I noticed you wrote this article on scaling effective teams. One line that stood out to me was it all comes down to great conversations. What if you could ensure that all of your reps over at Tenbound were having great conversations, just like you mentioned in your article, building more rapport with your buyers and driving more closed won business as a result. So again, in summary, just to recap, the 3 ways I would start a hook line is what if, imagine if, and I have an idea on how you could, and nail those 3 parts home. But this is what makes or breaks reps in my experience, is how well are you hooking personalization to relevance. If you personalize without being relevant, people will like you, but they won't buy your product because they don't think you can help them. If you're relevant without being personalized, then, some people will buy because you hit the nail on the head in terms of their buyer persona pain point, but you're not really different and you're not going to get an overwhelming amount of responses. And you're just like every other rep out there. All of your decision makers, I would plead with you, all of your decision makers are getting hundreds of emails per day, with all kinds of sales reps that are all pushing their product and they all think it's important and they all think they're better than their competitors and they think that they do these 3 things well. So I challenge anyone who's listening today to be different by knowing who they are. Not only knowing just one little clip, but looking through their LinkedIn and getting a general sense for what kind of person this is, what is their background, what are the things they've done, so that it can help better educate you on how to speak to them with relevance. So if you're talking to a decision maker, a vice president, a head of, let's say a VP of sales over at Oracle, you're talking to someone who spent a lot of time in the industry getting to where they're at. And they have warranted the respect of our time and of our focus and of us doing a little bit of research beforehand to be relevant. So a quick way to do that is just by knowing some piece of data point to say to them so that we can help them know that it's worth their time to listen to us. So I think the CMO of Lyft said it the best. If you want 15 minutes of my time, give me 5 of yours first by researching me. So in the value prop, you want to make sure that you hook that personalization to whatever is relevant to them in terms of their buyer persona. The third line to the first email is going to be your CTA, where we request one time, to unpack, whatever it is we talked about in our email above. This should be one of the shortest lines or the shortest line in the email. And then we close with what I call the push-pull technique. So the push-pull technique is basically a way to balance your emails. So I see a lot of reps, end with a hard CTA, give me a meeting. Then I see some reps end with a soft CTA because they want to soften the blow. They'll say, something like, is this relevant to you? Or they'll try to be a little bit, looser just to get the conversation going. I think the happy medium here is iron fist and a velvet glove. So we want to make sure that we're direct with our buyer and what we want, but that either way, we find value in what they're doing. So, this is a great spot to put COVID, quote unquote, COVID language, if you will. See a lot of people start with hope you're well and your kids are well. You want to, that causes pattern interrupt for your prospects. And you want to make sure that your prospects, sometimes if you mention COVID too early, they think that you're monetizing a pandemic. But you also can't not mention COVID because otherwise you're tone deaf, right? So you want to mention it at a time, where it's relevant in messaging. And the push-pull line is a great way to do this. You can say, if you give me a shot Wednesday at 3 to unpack how VPs of sales leverage chorus, to drive more quota attainment, I promise we can part ways as friends if you're not impressed. Either way, such a big fan of your content, and be genuine in this line. Either way, keep the good content coming. Loved your article, or such a big fan of your team, and hope you're staying safe with everything going on in the world. So it's a great way to tie in some kind of COVID language, tie in the fact that you're their fan either way. And this really leaves your buyer with a sense of like, hey, whether you give me what I want or not, whether you meet with me, whether you give me money, whether you engage with us from a business perspective, either way, I thought the article was great. And I, find value in what you're doing. So it gives your buyer this sense of like, okay, this person is actually interested and genuinely tied to me, regardless of whether the outcome is good for them or not. So quick little story, and then I'll keep launching into these emails. I am home for quarantine, and my parents have a dog named Snowball. I'm back in Texas. And every night right before I go to bed, I cook egg whites and I eat them. And Snowball, of course, comes upstairs, barreling upstairs, and she wants the plate. She wants to lick the plate. So I give it to her, and I'm like, okay, she wants to clean the plate, whatever. That's what dogs do. And I still love her. I think she's great. Then one night, after she cleaned the plate, she's just sitting there at the edge of my bed, and she's staring at me. And I'm like, okay, what does she want? I already gave her the plate. Like, she got what she came here for. And she started crying a little bit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think she wants to come up here. So I said, come up here, come on. She jumps up in the bed and she wants to snuggle with me. And I'm like, it gave me such an overwhelming feeling of, regardless of if this egg plate is gone, I still want to spend time with you. And so it made me more want to give her the egg plate more, because I knew that either way she wanted to, spend time with me and hang out and watch TV with me. So you want to give your prospects the Snowball special. You essentially want to communicate to them that you are there for them regardless of whether they give you what you want. So this is a great example. You could take a screenshot of this. So this is going to be, this is how it looks within Outreach for us. It's a shell sequence and basically incorporates a lot of language to, speed it up, but also gives you, a little bit of room to be creative. So here's a couple places in here my reps kind of go a little bit outside the box. Second email, I need to go quick here. I only have 6 minutes left. Second email, I basically clipped from Outreach of what they call the Agoji email. And essentially, it's going to be a response email to your first thread with just the words, any thoughts, and content attached. I would suggest third-party content here. If the content is from your company, then prospects inherently doubt it, because they think it's you leading them down some kind of trail to, illustrate how awesome you are and how they can use your product. So I would suggest third-party content here, regardless of how wonderful your content is, there's a place to work it in. I would, argue right up front, you want to, give them something that's relevant that isn't necessarily proving that your company is quote unquote awesome. But this email, I was actually surprised. I fought outreach back a little bit on this, wondering whether it would work. And we see quite high conversion here. So here's how it would look with an outreach. Hi, first name, any thoughts? And then this is the content we put in here. Given your team's growth, I thought you might like this session that covers how to structure a cold call. The third email, I essentially do the same type of email that I did in the first email, but with different wording. So I do not mention that I have reached out before. If your first premise didn't work and the reply email didn't work, you don't want to remind a prospect that they dumped you. So you want to start over with a fresh personalized premise, give them a body of how to hook that to personalization, or how to hook that personalization to what's relevant for them. CTA with, if you give me a shot, if you give me a chance to meet you and unpack that idea on Tuesday at 2, I promise I won't jam your inbox with follow-up messages if I strike out. And then I would say, in any case, that's another way to push pull. You say, in any case, I hope that you're saying with, you get the idea, but you basically just want to focus on language that's different than the first email, but the same in terms of structure. Reason for your outreach is the longest line, bodies medium length, CTA is the shortest length, and then you push pull at the end. So here's an example. Quick example, and we'll send out the deck afterwards. At least I think we can. Fourth email, I essentially reply to my third email. So first email is personalized, second's a reply, third email is personalized, fourth is a reply, and essentially in the fourth email, I take accountability for them not responding. One of the most attractive qualities in business to me is whether you're accountable or not. Accountable for your mistakes and accountable for your success. I was watching a Taylor Swift documentary this weekend. Don't make fun of me. But there's a part where she finds out that she has not won a Grammy for her Reputation album. And in that moment, her agent tells her, you didn't win anything. Her response, I have goosebumps thinking of it. Her response was, she said, I got to make a better album. She didn't blame it on the judges. She didn't say it was BS. She didn't talk about, Kanye and all the drama. In that moment, she knew, she just said, I have to make a better album. That's what's within my control. And so within this fourth email, I usually take some level of accountability of, I was reading an article the other day about, being relevant to your end buyer. And I was convicted about the email I sent over to you. I should have respected your time a little bit more and given your permission. I'd like another shot to earn some time on your calendar. And then I go into personalization. So this is my third personalized premise that I use. I go into personalization in the third line, body again of hooking it, and then a CTA at the end. So this one is a little bit longer of an email. So you want to, be cognizant of length. But, in my experience, when you personalize, you earn more time to speak. So when something's about that person in specific, they again, this could be just my experience. But I see it, people want to keep reading because you made it a game and said about how awesome you are in your product and you're number one and yada, yada, yada. Here's all my social proof, all my infographics about how much awesome results you're going to have for my platform. If you're talking about them, you buy more time. So this is how it looks within outreach for us. Again, this is really a shell sequence, where I'm putting types of language. And then I give my reps, I basically take all of the lists cleaning off of them of the who and the what, channel and the when to talk to. But they are solely spending their cerebral calories here on the personalized premise and hooking it. And then the last email is a breakup email. The breakup email, I've seen reps do one of two things. They either say like, hey, I've reached out to you 100 times and you haven't responded to me, and I guess I'm just going to leave, making your prospect feel a little bit guilty, that they didn't respond. Or I've seen people say, hey, one of three things has happened. Here's the list of what could have happened. You don't value data, you're off on vacation, da, da, da. Can you just respond with a number? And then I can update my CRM. So Chris Voss, he would call this the yes trap. So basically it sets up for your prospect. They don't want to answer because they know that if they answer that you aren't just going to take that to update your CRM. You want to counter and you want to sell. And so they typically don't respond. So I'd say in the breakup email, I typically am just giving this as a final reminder to my prospect of like, hey, I don't think this is a fit anymore, but I'm taking the accountability that it's probably not a good time for them. So the 4 pieces to a breakup email. Number 1, I check and I say, I fall on my sword, so to speak. And I say, I just want to check in one last time and make sure I haven't overstepped my bounds. Given your article that you wrote originally, I originally thought it made sense to reach out. I do what's called the hard walkout principle. I say, maybe it's just me, but I'm getting the feeling now it's just not the best time to connect. And then I push-pull technique. If not, no worries. Perhaps we can connect in the future. And I typically, you'll see within this template, you might want to take a screenshot, but you'll see within this template, I even give them a piece of content on the back end. I usually say like, as a parting gift, I thought you might like SOCI 20, State of Conversation Intelligence 2020. But I essentially, this is one of my highest response rates ever as a template, close to a template. All you're doing is personalizing here. But basically, you're trying to give them the kind reminder and close out the relationship. And give them reasoning of like, hey, I'm getting the feeling it's just not the best time to connect. And you'll get a lot of people responding in here. It's hard to leave someone on the floor whenever they trip in front of you. So they'll say, hey, it's actually not you. It's just X, Y, and Z. And they'll couple along with what's going on in their business. And it's just a really sweet way to exit the conversation. So I would say, regardless of what product you're selling and who you're selling into, my biggest recommendation in sales is always sell with integrity. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you say you're not going to do something, I would try my hardest not to do it. Don't mudsling against competitors, etc. But whenever we're talking about this email, you're saying you're going to walk out the door. Nothing worse than a rep that comes back and then tries to pitch you. So after this, I usually ice, that contact at least, for 2 months, and maybe rotate them to someone else. But you want to give them the feeling that, you just sent over this high risk, high reward breakup email. If they don't respond, then you need to have the respect to walk away. So in summary, I know that was a lot of information, and I know prospecting is really tough. COVID has been really hard on the selling community in general, but as always, I think that we have a great opportunity here to refocus on what matters, to personalize and say the things that resonate with our prospects and make them know that we're not going to waste their time, because we crafted a pitch that really means something to them. So I think the bedrock of that is how you craft your messaging and how you're personalizing and how you're relevant and saying something to them that they would be crazy not to respond to. That's it. David, do you want to come back in the chat, or where do we go from here?
I'm pressing buttons. I think we've got a couple minutes for questions if you're cool with it.
Of course.
If anybody wants to chat in, any questions or any thoughts, we can hang out for another few minutes. Didn't see anything come in. I think everybody bailed to the next session. So Becc, that was amazing. How do we get in touch with you, to dig in more on this?
Yes. So you can find me on as Becc Holland on LinkedIn. And I'm not going to tell anyone what it is, but I have a surprise for everyone next week. So you might want to, maybe this week, maybe latest next week. So connect with me on LinkedIn, and, I can answer any kind of questions or send over any kind of slides.
Very excited to find out about that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Right?
What's that?
What a tease, right? Something's going to drop.
Awesome. Well, let's make sure everyone follow Becc on LinkedIn and all the various social channels, and we'll be on the edge of our seat. So thanks for jumping on.
I like Derek's booing me. He's over at TalkDesk. Derek, hi. You're just going to have to wait, okay?